Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look at behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Well, today we're getting someone who's really been looking behind the headlines, going deep into the raw data that give us a picture of what our community looks like. Say good afternoon to Kelly Davila, Senior Research Associate at DataHaven. They have a new big study out, nearly 100 pages about community well-being in New Haven. Good morning, and thanks for coming into the Independent.
Yeah, thanks.
It was really nice to meet you before we went on the air. I've been a fan of DataHaven since you folks started, since before you got here. People really trust that info. They say information is power. When government policymakers and government officials and advocates push certain positions, they're often drawing on your information about what's going on. So do you feel any heavy responsibility, big weight on your shoulder, Kelly, that you better get it right or someone's life's going to get messed up?
I think we're more just glad that people are using the information for something that they can, make effective change.
And more seriously, it's almost like you have to work hard to get people to care about asthma rates or income inequality or transit inequalities, correct?
Yeah, when we can link those things together and make it a more cohesive story, I think people tend to listen a little bit more than if we were just like, hey, here's the asthma rate for this city, in a vacuum. It doesn't really happen like that.
I'm going to ask you to get much closer to the mic, like you're almost touching it. You use the word story, Kelly. Is your opinion is data a crucial ingredient of a story, and is the role of data miners, data collectors, data analysts like yourselves to create a story that we could tell about our community as a snapshot in time?
Right. I think we play a role in how people can use elements of the data to tell different kinds of stories. We ourselves, I think, want to make a point, and that's, the kind of overall goal of this study is to unite several different topics into one kind of picture, a snapshot in time of a given location, but individually, each of the, chapters and graphics and stories that we are telling in this data to make our point, people can use for another purpose. And we see that a lot, for example, with grant writing, people who are able to use this information to, acquire money to make an actionable difference in their communities.
So if they say we want to take on asthma, we want to take on green transit, if we want to get money to do that, we have to show that there's evidence that there's a challenge, evidence that there's an issue that needs to be addressed. And it's kind of hard to find that evidence sometimes.
Yeah, and it's certainly, difficult to find like the intersection between, for example, transit and health, when people who are, working in one of those organizations or one of those areas, it becomes a much more compelling argument when they're applying, for example, grant money, to show that a transit-oriented development could have a measurable impact on public health in addition to a measurable impact on the economy, et cetera, et cetera. How
do you get people to trust you? People often say, I like the numbers that tell me the story I want to hear. Otherwise, we say that was just cooked. The people had a bias.
I think we just have faith in the quality of the survey that we put out and the quality of the information that we're using. I mean, we're also going to be the first people to tell you that data is a little bit outdated. I mean, no set of data is up to the moment. So we're always kind of looking back in time, and we're always kind of beholden to however the questions in surveys, for example, are asked or what kinds of questions are asked. So there's absolutely room for improvement. But, we will also, stand behind the quality of the information, the quality of the statisticians, for example, at the Census Bureau, who are crunching these numbers and making them as reliable as possible.
I remember you were the first place I turned when there was the once a decade census, and what was interesting there was the story about, I thought, the increase in Latino population, not just in the city, but ring suburbs. Mm-hmm. So I do have your title, Kelly Davila, is Senior Research Associate at DataHaven. Do you have a term you prefer for what your profession is? Are you a data miner? Are you a data analyst? Are you a data geek?
I think we're kind of, or at least, I'll speak for just myself. There are other people at the organization, but what I do mostly is kind of put the story to human words that I look at in data. So there's an analyst component to that. There's a little bit of data science involved in that, and there's also just kind of a policy mindedness that you have to have when you're trying to interpret the kind of important elements from a large set of data.
Is your fun book by your bedside, the 1999 to 2017 Brookings report on trends in demographic change, urban change?
No, I definitely am the novel kind of person.
Oh, me too. Something, I'm immersed in news all day, and 95% of the books are either novels because I need to kind of go off into space in those stories to talk about the bigger issues that we deal with on a human level. Right.
Yeah. And it also, I think, helps with being able to communicate, writing in an effective and compelling way to be able to read something that's not just a, white paper.
And also think that novels are truer if they're good. That if you write, you have to convince someone once you have the suspension of disbelief for like that there are space creatures in your midst, or that someone's still alive you thought died 20 years ago or something. Once you have agreed on what the parameters are, you have to convince something that a reader that the words you're hearing are true, or that what two characters did to each other really happened, which I think requires tapping into a larger challenge of making believable.
Right. Yeah.
A story. I don't know. Maybe we got way off base. Tell us about the community well-being study. So, the DataHaven just released a community well-being study, and if I have it right, you had 3 versions of that: Greater Fairfield, Greater Hartford, and Greater New Haven. That you went up to the state capitol recently and released it. Tell us what the study is and why you released it at the state capitol.
So the information that we put in these books, and this is the 3rd edition of them, is drawn from a number of different sources. And what we're really trying to do is, again, give kind of a snapshot and overview of those 3 regions of Connecticut, which comprises, about 3/4 of the state and about 3/4 of the population. So the books themselves are kind of a compendium of different data sources that we're using in order to give a snapshot of what overall health and well-being, civic life, environmental quality, how all of those things are, kind of playing out right now in each of these regions. So the study itself is funded by more than 80 partners across the state, but the 3 foundations in those 3 regions, the Fairfield County Community Foundation, Greater New Haven, Greater Hartford Foundations, are all major funders in those. And part of the reason why we're writing in these regions is because they're using those, and the organizations that work with those foundations are using these books. Again, for purposes like grant writing and being able to tell a story behind, whatever area of expertise they have, and making more compelling arguments for, more actionable change in those areas. But we also wanted to bring the attention of the book to state legislators who, we work with some of them. We have good relationships with, for example, like mayors in different municipalities, but reaching out to, at the state level, organizations or different government agencies who may also find the information useful. That was part of the reason why we did it at the Capitol this year.
And how much? So you said it's the 3rd edition. Do you do this every year?
No, every 3 years. So, those who are following along at home, 2022 would have actually been the year that we put it out. 2023 is kind of what happened. And a lot of the reason for that is because, the pandemic delayed a lot of the information that we rely on for this report, and we wanted it to be as up to date as possible. So we included, we wanted to wait, for example, the 2020 census to come out, more recent data, and so we can look at, that information. But also that gave us an opportunity to look at multiple waves of our survey data. So we've been running a statewide survey for, I think 2012 was the first one. So we've interviewed more than 40,000 adults in Connecticut over time, and by incorporating multiple waves of that, we were able to, for example, run a short wave of that survey during COVID to see how people were affected by job loss or health insurance loss, or just how they were infected by COVID itself. So a lot of that information was able to get into this 2023 report. If we delayed it just a little bit, we could incorporate a little bit more of that stuff.
So what'd you find? So there's the first really big picture of how we're doing since the pandemic. What's changed, and what's the current snapshot of our health and happiness?
I mean, everything has changed, right? It seems like it's such a cliche to even say that right now after several years of ongoing post-pandemic kind of recovery. But, the things that changed the most, the first thing that comes to mind is housing, and just the cost of housing and how that has absolutely skyrocketed. I could...
give me a data point on that.
I can pull you numbers quick.
And we're talking New Haven, right?
This is going to be New Haven County. So a little bit, again, that's another limitation of the data, is that we're not always able to use our our town level data in Connecticut, because the towns are so small, 169 of them in Connecticut. So sometimes you have to, settle for a county level data point, but it still kind of shows the story. So, between 2018 and 2020, the overall, rent and housing cost would increase about 5% per year. 2020 to 2022, that increased about 32% for home prices and about 22% in rent.
I'm sorry, how much for home?
32%.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how much for rent?
22.
Wow.
And that's
even though we had all that rental protection, I guess did that actually jack up the prices?
Yeah, well, it's difficult to really identify what the cause of that is. I mean, a lot of it is, I think, I was also trying to buy a house during that time, and not just the cost of, or not just the interest rates would continue to go up, but because the demand was so high, housing
I remember
prices.
that, and we kind of got past that a little bit.
Yeah, and that has, I think that was maybe a little bit more extreme in Fairfield County than it is in Greater New Haven or Greater Hartford, but
it definitely went up like crazy here.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean,
and then our rents, I wonder how much rent's got to be tied somewhat to that. I'm not sure how much.
Yeah.
Because rent's also cooling down last 6 months, correct?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, too, was, just anecdotally, like, the building that I live in here in New Haven, I was the only one here. Everybody else had gone home. So they're renting these units, but they're not.
It's so funny, home wasn't the neighborhood.
Exactly. I mean, that's New Haven. But you can imagine that had happened in enough places where there were occupied units that were, effectively vacant when people went to go, cohabitate with whoever, their parents, their partners, whatever. Mm-hmm. So the demand or the supply of available apartments kind of dropped in that point too. So
we're talking to Kelly Davila, who's Senior Research Associate at DataHaven, which tells us all the facts and figures and puts into a story about our community well-being. They just put out their first in 3 years community well-being study about New Haven. You can get it at ctdatahaven, correct?
Mm-hmm.
.org,
Mm-hmm.
which is their website. Everybody can read it. It's free. Kelly, tell us some other, you looked at everything from economic issues, social issues, family security, housing, health and safety, criminal justice, education. Tell me something else that jumped out at you in this community well-being report.
Another, kind of important thing, and I think this is in part related to, the pandemic recovery efforts, there was a really noticeable drop in food insecurity.
A drop? Oh, because we were giving a lot of people free food. We were so worried people were going to go hungry, and we really mobilized for that year or two for all these food giveaways. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. So the pandemic relief programs, they had expanded SNAP benefits or SNAP eligibility in addition to there just being, a bigger, I think, push to donate to food banks and things like that.
Right, so that's probably left out government policy there.
Yeah. There was a huge impact on the policy there where what we saw in Connecticut in total, food insecurity dropped from 13% in 2020 to 10%. And once those programs faded out, that total dropped up to 17% for food insecurity. So it was higher than pre-pandemic levels once those policies were allowed to sunset.
So what was the 10% number? What year?
That was in 2020. So that was, 2021. That was,
and when was the 17% number?
2022.
Because they didn't really fully sunset yet. I thought it was 2023 when a lot of the sunset happened.
For food expansion, for SNAP expansion, I think it was just at the end of it was the, March, I think, of 2022.
So basically you're on Matthew Desmond's side. Oh. Matthew Desmond says that poverty is, and there's a debate about this, poverty, the main driver, it is just as a policy, whether it's the way we don't regulate companies that prey the most financially on people with least ability to pay. 2, we made a decision during the pandemic to care about people for 5 minutes, and all of a sudden people had more money and they weren't hungry and they weren't poor. And now they're poor and hungry again. Is that sort of where you come down on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And apologies to Professor Desmond. That book is by my bedside table, and I've not started reading it. I know.
Okay, you do have a nonfiction book by your bedside table.
Of course. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that he's in that book especially, he's kind of putting to term, a lot of we like to talk about social inequality and racial inequity and all the structures that perpetuate that. And I think he's putting that to a much more specific point in terms of policy where, using that as an example, we clearly have the ability to alleviate some of the suffering that a lot of our, neighbors are experiencing. And then once we, decide effectively to stop doing that, then it's back to normal. Or
He does
worse
have
than
a
normal.
nuance, though. It's kind of interesting. The right has seized on part of his research, which is, yes, he thinks we should have kept the expanded earned income tax increase. Yes, he thinks we should have expanded SNAP benefits. But he said we've actually not become stingier on benefits we give. It's the other kind of ways, whether it's the extra higher fees to cash a check with your paychecks. You already start out losing 10 or 20% of your money, to the way predatory loans get you so much debt that you eventually lose your car, you lose your home, and you're in more debt than when you started. So it's a little unclear, I guess. If you do read that book, let me know, because he seems a little bit to be arguing both ends of this, that, we should be more generous. We shouldn't be so stingy on the safety net compared to other Western countries, because we saw how we alleviated, as you mentioned, with the numbers you just gave us. But that, in fact, since the Great Society, we do, in real dollars, pay more to help people. And it's the other ways that unregulated predatory capitalism contributes to poverty.
Yeah, and that, it's a big driver in, I think, a lot of the themes that we're seeing throughout, throughout the book. So we talked about housing already, and, these kinds of policy expansions that helped alleviate some burdens on, for example, the eviction moratorium probably helped more people than we can really measure.
Yeah.
Of course, evictions have gone back up and are now exceeding pre-pandemic levels since that moratorium sunset in 2021, I believe. But also just in terms of the number of jobs that were lost, what was created back again, and what's being scaled back.
What are you finding on that in your report?
That one is a little less straightforward. Hang on just one second.
And you listen to Kelly Davila, Senior Research Associate at DataHaven. They have a new community well-being study on everything from our social to economic to housing and criminal justice sectors, how we're faring. And you can get that at ctdatahaven.org. And I've been asking her for some of her bullet point highlights of the report about community well-being in Greater New Haven. We're talking about whether evictions, housing, hunger, it dropped during the pandemic relief and then came back bigger than ever before when those emergency measures were taken away. So what do you got for us, Kelly?
Yeah, so during lockdown, I think everybody kind of recalls that the essential workforce was you're going to have grocery store workers, retail, pharmacy, things like that, who didn't experience the same job losses as maybe you saw in restaurant industry, service industry in general. So those industries took really big hits. 3-4% decline in the number of jobs in New Haven County, which kind of rebounded a little bit in the period of 2020 to 2022. But now I think, people are saying that Amazon is having big layoffs, for example, when they had previously expanded their workforce during...
And they're big here with the North Haven plant, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all over Connecticut, I think they've got a pretty big footprint in the manufacturing industry in a lot of areas. So, that's another effect that we're seeing now is that these job creations, this expansion in certain industries is now refracting a little bit. And we'll have to see, in the next year or so where those people end up.
And you do have a community well-being index score. Is there an overall number or two overall numbers that tell us how well we're doing?
Yeah. So the index score is our measure of, using multiple indicators, for example, like unemployment or housing affordability, homeownership rates, if we put all those together and we kind of assign an average score to them, across these 8 indicators, what's the overall? In Connecticut, so for all 3 books, one of the things that we're finding is that in all 3 regions, Greater New Haven, Fairfield County, and Greater Hartford, there are some of the kind of worst off neighborhoods and worst off towns in the state, alongside towns that are better than the highest scoring places in the country. So what that says is that we're still seeing lots of the effects of segregation, basically in Connecticut and these towns, by those who have who score very highly on these metrics, right alongside those who score more low.
So did you find that the high scores are scoring higher than they did 3 years ago, and the low scores are lower than 3 years ago, or no?
It's a little bit of a mix. In some cases, yes. For example, like the outer ring towns in New Haven. So that's going to be Woodbridge, Bethany, Milford, Orange, Granford, Guilford, Madison. Yes. Their score increased by about 3% between the last time we looked at this. So that would be between 2015 and 2020. Whereas New Haven, their score dropped 6%.
Wait, 2015 to 2020? Mm-hmm. We're not doing through 2022?
Oh, no, this is, so the most recent data that we have is 2020.
Oh, so we don't have the pandemic data?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
So, of course, it's going to be very different from then. But
and New Haven City dropped how much?
6%.
Oh, okay. So, Kelly, how did you get involved in this? How long have you been working at DataHaven, and where are you from?
I'm originally from San Antonio. I have moved all over the country, mostly in the Midwest. I came here in 2019. I started working for DataHaven in 2019, so it's been...
So you came here to work there?
Yeah, I came
What
here
drew you here? Were you a data geek already?
Yeah, I worked in a similar capacity in Indiana University.
Okay. Mm-hmm. How you liking it?
I love New Haven. Like I said, I was trying to buy a house here last year. I really love New Haven.
Were you able to buy the house?
I was not.
Because the price is too high?
Well, because I got outbid by cash every single time.
Oh, and was it the slumlords or no?
Maybe. I don't think that we could have that information.
You were outbid, got cash every time.
Every time, but...
And wow. And did you want to look at suburbs, or you really wanted to be in the city?
Oh, no, I need to stay in New Haven.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Wonder, are you going to try again?
Maybe in a few years. We'll see.
Wow, well, that's kind of an important data point there. And tell me, when you're measuring well-being and happiness, how do you make sure you maintain that trust so that people across the ideological spectrum and the urban-suburban divide will trust your numbers? Like, how are they going to say, well, you're just trying to cook the numbers, so you're trying to get us to do something about issues we don't want to do something about?
I think that the inputs that we're using, especially for our community well-being index or community index scores, are pretty universal. For example, if we say that the home ownership rate in a place is for example 25% in a city like Hartford, that could be better. I think everybody could agree that that's not a sustainable thing for the city of Hartford.
All right. Any final words you want us to know about community well-being, or what you want people to do with the work, or how they could find out more? ctdatahaven.org/reports. We've got these 3 reports, and then we've also got, for each town in Connecticut, a kind of separate mini report that summarizes a lot of its data. So that's been very useful for people that we've heard. One of our more popular products available. Great. Well, Kelly, thanks so much for coming in. Kelly Davila, Senior Research Associate at DataHaven. They just got done with a big lift. They're once every 3 years community well-being study at ctdatahaven.org. And anything next? What's your next big project?
Oh, we've got a lot on the table right now for different kinds of health reports.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, keep up the good work.
Yeah.
And we're going to take a little break, folks, and come back with some other heroes in our community from the 911 call center in New Haven. So take a break. We're going to listen to the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Harry Droz at the controls is going to bring us back in 10 minutes with segment 2 on Dateline New Haven.